Welcome back to this radio series that we're calling Faith in a Digital World. In this series, we're exploring how followers of Jesus can live, lead, and love well in a world that is shaped by technology. Each week, we take a closer look at the opportunities and challenges that come with being people of faith in an online world, a world that is constantly shifting, constantly speaking, and constantly inviting us to respond with wisdom, courage, and grace. Today's conversation is one that I've genuinely been looking forward to. We're joined by Jacqueline Holbrook, or Jackie, as many know her, a writer, speaker, and digital discipleship advocate who is helping Christians rethink what influence looks like online. Jackie has become a trusted voice for believers who want to navigate social media without losing their soul in the process. She's the author of How to Be a Christian Influencer, a book that challenges us to move beyond chasing likes or building platforms and instead approach social media with intention, authenticity, and a kingdom-centered purpose. What I love about Jackie's work is the way she bridges the gap between theology and the everyday realities of digital life. She doesn't speak from a distance. She speaks as someone who has wrestled with the same questions many of us have. How do I show up online without performing? How do I share my faith without becoming preachy? How do I stay grounded when the internet never sleeps? Whether you're someone with a large online following or whether you're just trying to navigate your presence on social media faithfully, her insights are both grounding and inspiring. And I think this conversation couldn't be more timely because we're living in a moment when digital spaces shape our imaginations, our relationships, and even our spiritual formation. The online world can amplify beauty and truth, but it can also magnify division, distraction, and pressure. Jackie invites us to step into those spaces not with fear, but with purpose, not with self-promotion, but with Christ-centered influence, not with noise, but with light. So in this episode today, we'll explore how Christians can shine brightly in digital spaces, what it means to cultivate genuine community online, and how to steward influence, big or small, in ways that reflect the heart of Jesus. We'll talk about the practical, the pastoral, and the deeply personal dimensions of digital discipleship. Jackie is with us now. Jackie, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a real pleasure to have you on the program. Now, you describe social media as a tool for evangelism and a social ministry. What does that look like in practice for everyday Christians, not just large platform influencers?
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I definitely think that we have to approach it in a very different way than we traditionally view evangelism. I think sometimes we think that it requires a pulpit or it requires a microphone, but a lot of times it just requires a looking glass into your daily life. We're charged to live and be a light. And in that, we have to sometimes just let the light shine and not do so much work as to trying to shine at people, right? So when I think about that, I sometimes think that, when we're shopping in the grocery store, when we're driving on the highway, right, and someone cuts us off, or when we're just living our daily lives at home, those are all moments where we can be evangelizing and showing how Christ is instead of just telling people who Christ is. And that's really what influencers do. I think influencers do a great job of, the ones that do it right, do a great job of showing their daily lives and showing the reality of their lives. And that's the good, the bad, and sometimes the difficult. And I think that we have to do a job of just evangelizing through our daily lives. So if we're going to give people a peek into our lives, show them how it looks to live out a life that is focused on Christ and to actually demonstrate in our daily lives how we can be ministers and true disciples of Christ. And, I think that right there is a tool that if more people used, we would reach a lot more lost people because they would really start to understand that they're not so different. And we all have a lot of things in common, but Christ is the thing that distinguishes us.
You emphasize in the book things like intention, authenticity, and you also say that faith should be at the center of all that we do. Which of those is hardest for Christians online today?
I think the faith being at the center is probably hardest because it's very easy to get distracted by all of the noise and the trends and the different I guess, conflicts that happen and arise on social media. So, when you start to get involved with social media, it can take you away from your center and you can start to lose sight of the goal. And if the goal is to love and to witness, we have to keep that there and not start to sway based off of others' opinions or other controversies that happen in the world. And I know that's very hard. And that's why it's so important for you to continue to pray, to seek God, to take breaks, to step away and to reevaluate. Because if you don't do that, it's very easy for you to lose sight of what the center and the main goal is.
So when we're online, it can be easy for us to be a little bit pernickety about social media and a bit critical of it. But how do you see spiritual formation happening in those spaces?
Yeah, I think sometimes we have to just keep it very simple in the sense of we're not trying to pastor people through social media. Our job is not to take the place of the church. Our job is to supplement and to help people see it throughout the week in a very natural, normal way. When I think about Christ and how he shares different people and their stories, they all have different backgrounds, right? Everyone isn't the same, and it's for a reason because God intentionally knew that we needed to see different versions of how we live out this life. So I think in that sense, we have to be realistic about the fact that we aren't going to look the same, and that's the point. And we have to make sure that we're not trying to, because when we do that, we kind of dilute what Christ is trying to do in our lives, and I think sometimes we have to be careful that we don't try to mimic what we've seen in the past, because that'll kind of hinder what God is trying to do in the now.
In your book, you talk about how Christian influencers need to shine brightly in a world that desperately needs light. How can we do that in a digital environment that often rewards outrage or self-promotion?
Ooh, that's really hard. I'm going to be honest. I will say that a lot of what we see online is magnified because of the drama, because of the controversy, and I will say that it's a little harder for us to work on being light consistently without falling into the trap of digging into the controversy or becoming someone who baits people based off of topics that will get their attention and keep them engaged, whether it's negative or positive. But I will say that I believe that God is still allowing for people to break through the noise. And sometimes it doesn't look like you having 1 million followers. Sometimes it doesn't look like you having 1,000 likes or even 10. Sometimes it just looks like you standing in the room that may look empty. So maybe you get 2 views on a post, but it was really something that God wanted you to share. And you have to think of it, even if you just reach 2 people, that's 2 people that needed that message. And you have to stop looking at the numbers on how you view success, especially on social media, because we are not like the traditional influencers. God has called us to influence for him. And sometimes that means that we will be hindered in our mission and we won't get the same looks and views as others. But just believe that as you put what God has called for you to do out there, he's going to do the rest. He's going to show it to the right people. The algorithm is not our God. Jesus is God. Jesus is the one who is the author and who really is the one who kind of magnifies everything that needs to get done. Before there was a microphone, before there was an Instagram or TikTok or any other social media platforms, there was Jesus, and there was his ability to disciple and to spread the gospel. And he did that in the most unique and I guess genius way. And he's still that same God.
Let's talk about some practicalities for a few minutes. And I guess in this part of the conversation, I'm deliberately wanting to focus here on people that just want to use their Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok account to glorify Christ. They're not in a situation where they've already got millions of followers, Perhaps one day they might, but they're just starting out. What are the first steps someone should take if they want to use their online presence for kingdom impact?
I would say first you need to just take a second and observe what's happening online. The worst thing you could do is just jump in and have no perception of what is happening in the world and what other people are dealing with. So I like to say assess the land before you kind of start creating content. And it'll help you see methods in which you can reach people, right? And it's not necessarily copying after people or trying to do exactly what others are doing, but sometimes the format is a huge difference maker on how people receive the content that you share. So look at different ways of formatting. After that, I would say take a poll of your audience, take a poll of people that you know. And I talk about this in the book a lot about how you need to start with asking people a simple question. What do you come to me for? What do you look to me for? And this is your friends, your families, your teacher, your students, your coworkers, and you'll be surprised by what they say. They may say, I love coming to you because you always tell me the right thing I should do when I'm dealing with my marriage, or when I come to you about fill in the blank, I feel really encouraged. That is going to be your starting point for how you begin to share online, because a lot of times what people find valuable in your daily life is also what people will find valuable in your social media presence. So once you start doing that, you'll really start to get into how you can really navigate the space. After that, it's a lot of other steps you can take to continue to grow and evolve, but that's the starting point where I think most of us need to be.
What are some of the common mistakes that you see Christian influencers make when they start out?
I think a lot of people start out just thinking they're going to blow up. And when you go into it with that mentality, you usually feel very discouraged when you don't get the response that you want. So I think that you have to really approach it in a very realistic way and start out thinking the goal is not to reach 1 million, the goal is to reach one. When you change your frame of thinking as to not focus on the likes and the views, naturally they will come. And when you start doing that, I've coached so many people, and when I started to see them literally stop worrying about the views and the likes, you could literally see the correlation in how their numbers started to grow because they were posting from a very real place. They were sharing relevant things to them and the people that they know. And from that, consistency really makes a difference. So as you consistently share and you keep a pattern up of, training the algorithm to know I'm going to show up whether you show it or not. It's eventually going to share you because it's going to trust you. And that's really what the algorithm is. It's just numbers. It's just a computer that's putting in data and it's following the trends. So if you're showing that I'm consistent and that I'm going to show up and I'm going to share relevant content, eventually it will start to push it out to more people.
I think that's a really good point. My wife enjoys watching a YouTube channel. It's about a lady who has bought an abandoned chateau in France and she's in the process of renovating it. This channel's been going on for years and years, but she put up a video the other day and she was talking about her journey on YouTube and on Instagram. And one of the things that she said is that she'd been making videos that had been watched by 2 or 3 people for years before her videos started to take off. So if we're really serious about this, we've got to be in it for the long run, haven't we?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that once you start hearing more stories like that, you'll start to see the pattern. And it's not that difficult once you start to see that this is normal. I'm not doing something wrong. I'm just following the growth spurt that happens on social media. And when you get it, you got to be ready to ride the wave because it's going to happen in a matter of seconds. I tell people, a lot of the people that I coach, one morning they start with 1,000 followers and they make a piece of content, and within a week they can grow from 1,000 to 10,000. That's how quick it can happen. And if you're consistent, you'll be ready for it.
How do we discern when we start putting posts together, creating content? How do we discern what is faithful versus what is simply performative?
Mm, that's really good. Something else that I like to do, and I put this test in the book as well that allows for you to take it ever so often. I recommend taking it at least maybe once a quarter just to reevaluate what you're doing online and why you're doing it. It's almost like a heart check. And it's really going to allow for you to remember your reason why. And I think that that's something that we have to do consistently so that we don't lose sight. And to this day, I still have to do it. So a lot of people think like, well, I only should do it when I feel like I'm doing something wrong. No, because a lot of times when you get off track, you don't even know it. You just start to create things and it's from emotions rather than spirit led. And I think that's where we lose sight because a lot of times in order to be spirit led, you have to consistently go back to the well. And I think that's the part where we can't forget. We have to remember that we need to go back to the source. We need to consistently consult our word and consult people around us. I always have what I call accountability partners, even on social media. Just like if you're working out, you have someone that hopefully keeps you accountable. On social media, I recommend you have that as well. Have an accountability person who looks at your content through an eye that remembers who you are. And when you start to get off track, they're the person or people who are going to bring you back to say, hey, that content that you made, how do you feel about it, right? And you want to make sure you pick the right people because, sometimes you may start getting a little sensitive about your content because, you don't think you're off. But if you have somebody who literally it is their job, you have talked to them about making sure that you don't get off track. When they do approach you, you'll remember, man, I chose this person for a reason. Let me hear them out. So those are some ways that I really think that you should really start to hold yourself accountable and to keep yourself in the right position.
Jackie Holbrook is the author of the book, How to Be a Christian Influencer. Now, for our next part of our discussion, I just want to talk a little bit about the communities that we can foster in online spaces. I've seen so many examples of Christian influencers who are followed by incredibly vulnerable people, and you can see it in the comments threads after they post something. What responsibility do you think Christian influencers have when it comes to things like pastoral care?
Mm. Yeah, I'm recently, I'm a pastor now. And so before I was a pastor, I was an influencer online and I really struggled with this place of hearing so many people that are in pain and struggling, and they will sometimes even reach out to you for pastoral care. And I think it's very important that you remember your role. And if you are a pastor, great, step into that place and allow for God to use you. But if you're not, I recommend that you start by doing your best to share with people the information that you know, but also point people to the right place where they can get consistent, reliable information. I often would tell people, I'm not a pastor, but here's what I suggest. I also would say that I suggest that you reach out to someone that you care about at your local assembly. Maybe it's a minister. If you go to a church where you can't directly touch your pastor, maybe it's someone who is, I guess, an evangelist, and that's someone who really can step in and help them more because they're equipped to do it. Just like a counselor who has a degree and a profession, I recommend that we really start to not try to supplement and be the thing that they need, but point them in the direction that they need to go.
Now, we talked about vulnerable people in comments threads. If we're going to talk
Mhm.
about comments on social media, we absolutely have to talk about hostility, because something about social media, you can see the very worst of people sometimes online. What advice would you give Christians when they face criticism or hostility as a result of one of their posts?
Mm, yeah, that's a really good question. I am also a counselor, so I have my master's in counseling and college student development. And as a counselor who approaches social media in that way, I always start off by saying, what is the goal of my comments? What is the goal of their comment? And when you start with that, it sometimes helps you with your response, right? So if you are looking at someone who's very hostile and angry and they're looking for a response from you, the logical response is to not meet them with that same hostility. It is to minimize the situation, de-escalate it, as some would say. And the best way to de-escalate a comment section, I guess, battle is to not respond in the comments. I myself prefer responding to someone who's very hostile in a direct message. I feel like that way they don't feel like they have to perform their view. They can actually just share what they're actually struggling with. And I will say about 90% of the time, what they say in my direct messaging is very different than what they would have said if I had responded in the comment section. So it's almost like when you think about correcting someone in front of a crowd, right? It's probably not the best way to share with someone, hey, you're doing that wrong, and yell it out into the world. Rather, it is more beneficial for you to kind of take that person to the side and say, hey, this is what's happening in a very gentle, calm voice between one and two. And I think the Bible really describes that on how we're supposed to correct our brethren. We're supposed to take them and confront them one to another, one to one, if possible, maybe with one other witness if needed. But, when starting to address people that are really hostile, we have to be careful not to escalate situations and do our best to de-escalate, which is meaning we don't respond the way they do. And if you're a person who does get very angry in the comments, I would just challenge you to think about your goal. Is it helpful for you to render an eye for an eye, or to meet something that you dislike with anger? Or is it more beneficial for you to respond as Jesus would and respond with a gentle and soft spirit?
Very occasionally, there'll be times when someone will post something on social media that they might regret. What advice would you give your clients about dealing with that? If they want to be a Christian influence, if they want to be a positive force for Jesus and the kingdom, they put something online that they've regretted. What should they do? Do they just take it down? Do they publicly repent? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think you have to take it on a case by case basis. And if it was something that I believe offended a large amount of people, I will say that you should take it down and then frame what happened. Share a post that will allow for people to understand that you did something that you did not like and that you are very sorrowful for, and how you're rectifying it and move forward, right? And I think sometimes we think that stepping back means that we're losing some valid stance with our audience. Like they're going to not trust us if we apologize or admit that we were wrong in a situation. But the reality is it does just the opposite. Because if you're a person that is able to acknowledge your faults, which people all know we have, everybody knows that no one is perfect. But if you're a person who is strong enough to acknowledge when you are wrong, it really sets you up for your audience to trust you more. And this is especially true on social media. Social media is a space where people are really coming for people that are very real, transparent, and honest. And when you share that, that really puts you in a position to show that wow, they're honest even about things they don't have to be, because no one has to come back and share that I was wrong or I misjudged or I misspoke. But when you do, you're really just showing that you're a person that they can trust. So that's what I would suggest. If you do get into a position where you've shared something you regret or something that you misspoke on, go back, share that you misspoke, and move forward, because that's the point. You want to tell people, it's not unnatural for people to be wrong. And I want to demonstrate that to you right now.
I've really enjoyed this conversation today. As we start to bring this discussion to a close, if you could give one piece of advice to the next generation of Christian content creators, what would it be?
I would say don't be scared to start. I am a former educator. I did not start off wanting or desiring to be a social media influencer, as most people do. Most people who are, living their daily lives doesn't start out with saying, "Hey, I want to be an influencer." But, for me, as I really started to see the effectiveness, and to see how many people I can reach and understand the mission of what God has called me to do, which is to go into the world and to preach and share the gospel of Jesus, I realized that, man, I can't be scared to do that in unique ways. The world is changing. So as it changes and God gives us new tools, I think it's only relevant that we use those tools and not be afraid to even start and see what happens. Because a lot of times we talk ourselves out of just starting because of, maybe we minimize who we think we could be or what we think we're capable of. I'm also a very strong introvert. I'm not a person who runs to the light. I actually enjoy my solitude, but I realized very quickly that there are a lot of people like me who need to hear from me. And, that right there is enough for me to step out of my comfort zone. So if you're a person who's maybe thinking this isn't for me, I challenge you to try it because it's worth the risk, right? If you have the ability to minister and to evangelize and really promote the mission of Christ in a unique and compelling way, it's no reason for you not to try it.
I've really enjoyed this conversation today. One hopeful question to end on, if I may. I've read reports recently about TikTok and the amount of Christians who like to share content on TikTok and how a lot of those posts are heavily shared around the world. What are you most hopeful about when it comes to the Christian faith in the online sphere right now?
I'm very hopeful that Christ is going to bring revival, even on social media. And I think when we thought about how God was going to pour out his spirit in the last days, we might have thought it was going to be on a one big event where we're all just sitting with our hands raised to Christ. And no one probably envisioned that he was going to use social media or use a platform to pour out his spirit. But I believe that it's a place where we can really reach people from all across the world and, not be in a physical place, but also be in the space where they are able to receive us. And that's what social media gives us. It gives us the ability to reach the masses and to allow for God's will to be done and for our voice to be a part of that mission. So I'm very hopeful that Christ is going to utilize influencers and leaders and innovators to share the gospel and to allow for his presence to be shared all across the world. And as Christian influencers, which we all are, I believe that that's what God is going to really move with in these last days.
Well, Jackie Holbrook, I've really, really enjoyed this conversation today. Thank you so much for being here. Jackie's book is called How to Be a Christian Influencer. Jackie, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Very excited to connect with everyone, and hopefully I can find you all on social media.
I really hope that you enjoyed that conversation with Jackie Holbrook, and I hope that you're enjoying this series so far. My prayer is that these conversations encourage you to approach your digital rhythms with fresh eyes and to ask deeper questions about why you share, how you engage, and who you're becoming in the process. And as you step back into the online world this week, I hope that you do so with courage, clarity, and compassion. I hope that your presence will be marked not by performance or by likes or by shares, but by purpose. Not by striving, but by surrender. And not by self-promotion, but by the love of Christ that is at work within you. Once again, thank you for being with us today, and a huge thank you to Jackie for sharing her wisdom and her heart. If this episode resonated with you, please do consider passing it along to someone who might need encouragement in their own digital journey. You can access all of this series so far when you go to our website at twr.uk/on-demand. Scroll down until you find the series of programs, Faith in a Digital World. And you can also watch some of these interviews on the TWR-UK YouTube channel. This podcast is a production of Transworld Radio UK. For more information, go to our website at twr.org.uk.